Welcome to Nasdaq TradeTalks, where we meet with the top thought leaders and strategists in emerging technologies, digital assets, regulatory landscape, and capital markets. I'm your host, Jill Malandrino, and joining me for Cybersecurity Awareness Month is Steve Mustard, consultant and subject matter expert, ISA Global Cybersecurity Alliance, Ayal Stern, Global COO of ThriveDX, and Jennifer Wilson, head of cyber practice at Newfront. We're here to discuss why risk assessment and processes are the form to the backbone of cybersecurity strategies. It is great to have all of you with us. Welcome to Trade Talks. Steve, let's kick it off with you. I think with the buzz that we're hearing around AI and all of these emerging technologies, it's important to remember that employees really are the front line and need that training and processes in place.
Right. When new technology is introduced, I think organizations look at the positives and they maybe don't look so much at the risk side. I think once they understand the risks and they can help educate their employees about how to manage those risks, then I think the organization will be in a better shape.
Yeah, and Ayal, let's talk about the human challenges here, because that element really does remain most significant when you think about vulnerabilities within the enterprise. What are some of the biggest challenges that the industry is facing?
I think that today, one of the biggest challenges around talent is actually investing in that talent, investing into programs that we have so many amazing technologies that are out there, but the investments in the human capital and actually being able to configure all these amazing technologies sometimes isn't there. Unfortunately, when folks need to downsize or create more efficiencies, that's the first type of budget that people actually start trimming down around training. And unfortunately, that also hits the cyber risk because it increases cyber risk.
Yeah, and Jennifer, another part of the challenge is too the emerging technologies such as AI and Gen AI that we are deploying as the good actors. The bad actors are also leveraging it for their priorities as well.
That's exactly right. It's a double-edged sword. On the positive side, AI provides organizations with efficiency and accuracy across all industries. From a cybersecurity perspective, we're using AI to predict, prevent, respond, mitigate cyber attacks. Our team uses AI tools to help clients identify critical risk factors, such as software vulnerabilities and open ports. But as you said, Jill, the threat actors are using the same exact tools. They're using it to identify critical risk factors as a path to exploit their targets. They're using it to massively increase the scope and scale with which to attack. And they're leveraging AI to give unskilled hackers the capabilities to pull off sophisticated attacks similar to deepfakes.
Mm-hmm. Jennifer, is the cyberspace the good actors? Are they winning? Is downtime decreasing? Are there anything positive? Is there anything positive to report in terms of the efforts that the cybersecurity space is acting on?
Absolutely. We've come a long way in a very short amount of time. I would say at the onset of the pandemic, we saw the ransomware epidemic. And at the time, nobody was prepared to prevent or identify those types of risks. Because of that, the insurance company and cybersecurity experts came together and came up with, a list of kind of must-haves: MFA, endpoint detection and response, et cetera, including employee training. And all of that has helped to reduce and prevent and help mitigate cyber attacks.
Ayal, what about having the appropriate skill set within the cyber workforce? Because it's not just the tech sector that's competing for the expertise of cyber leaders and the workforce that makes it up. I mean, this is something that's necessary across every enterprise, small, medium, large, every industry, every vertical.
So again, skills, there's a skill set for every single employee in the company, from the person that takes the mail in the morning up until the person that makes decisions in the boardroom. And unfortunately, sometimes this is the last thing anybody wants to talk about. And having interactive programs that actually make people interested in what's behind these bad actors, how are they doing it, and keeping updated trainings around it. And that skill level, it's not only the responsibility of the cyber team or the engineers, it's the responsibility for every single employee throughout the organization about not being exposed to cyber. And it's a responsibility also people at home. Because we can be exposed not only in the workforce, but we can be exposed in our backyard, sitting at home. For example, somebody just hacking our Wi-Fi. So this is a really important point.
Yeah, that's a great point that you do make, Ayal, because it's not simply just about emails and phishing and smishing. It is so more complex and developed than it would have, even just 2-3 years ago. Steve, I think it's important to point out that while there is a rush to get innovation either within the enterprise or product go to market, that is especially with generative AI, and that's part of the consumer vernacular. We all understand what that is, right? How do you balance that innovation while also spending the time and the resources on risk assessment and mitigating, as well as thinking about incident response?
Right. Well, a few points. I think, first of all, businesses need to understand what the business impact of a cybersecurity incident is, not just about the loss of their data, but what does that actually mean for their business? Is it a regulatory incident? Is it a branding or reputational incident, or whatever it might be? I think with generative AI in particular, I want to emphasize one thing, which is Jennifer made a good point about it being a double-edged sword, but one of the other downsides of the generative AI thing is understanding where your intellectual property might exist now, and whether it's still within your environment, and whether it's contained or it's out there in the world. And so that's just like cloud computing is another one where we have to be concerned about how we're going to manage our data going forward. So yeah, understanding the risk to the business, and then understanding how to manage that risk, and understanding what the implications are, is really key.
Yeah. And Jennifer, another thing you need to consider, outside of the consumer experience and within the enterprise, there are vulnerabilities that are associated with vendors and the supply chain and third parties and so forth, whoever you are working with. I mean, that there's also that risk as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And the insurance companies are not shy to inquire about what vendors our clients are contracting with and what do those contracts look like. And part of my job as a broker is to help our clients understand not just their risk, but the risk that with the third parties that they're contracting with, and how they can trigger coverage under their policies to provide them with coverage similar to the contingent business interruption coverage that we see with supply chain types of attacks.
Yeah. Jennifer, is there a way, or is there a formula in terms of how to quantify how much cyber insurance you need? I would assume it's not a one-size-fits-all solution, because there's different types of vulnerabilities for different companies, size of companies, the amount of risk, a specific company is willing to take on.
Yes, absolutely. And clients are always asking about limits and how to ensure that they have limit adequacy. We have a lot of tools that we can use to help our clients understand their overall risk, from loss modeling to looking at their contract size, looking at their controls, what types of controls they have in place, looking at their record count, revenues, et cetera.
Mm-hmm. And Ayal, I think it's also important too that cybersecurity becomes part of the culture of the company as well, from the board to senior leadership, filtering all the way down to your point, the people that turn on the lights in the office in the morning, that it has to be, the processes need to be in place. It needs to be operationalized. It needs to be part of the culture and the fabric within an organization. It's not a luxury type of resource to have.
Yeah. Look, I think if in the past, locking the door just when you leave the office at night was something so important, that's as important right now, of actually going through and making sure that your email, you're not pressing any link that you shouldn't press. And you said it, it's all about culture. How do this come up from the board level, from the executive level, and not just something that is checking the box? I think a lot of the different programs that are around today, people see a check the box and doing this for my insurance or whatever, but the reputational risk of companies that can be hacked. And if it's not ingrained in their culture, I think actually insurance companies should actually have some kind of measurement around, is it really part of the fabric, to your point, of companies, versus just something that I'm looking to check the box and move forward.
Yeah. Steve, when you think about in terms of mitigation versus response, do you hear about enterprises focusing on one area more than the other when it comes to cyber preparedness?
I think to date, organizations have focused a lot about the mitigation side, the prevention side. I think they're starting to get better at the response side, and that's evident in some of the things that Jennifer said about the success to date. So I think without good response, then your preventative measures are not really going to help you, because eventually the bad guys are going to get in somehow. So you have to have a good incident response plan. And again, back to people. The people need to know what that incident response plan is, and they need to know how to execute it, and they need to train on it. And just to emphasize another point, the third parties, all of those people in the supply chain, are part of that incident response as well. So without them being prepared, you're just as vulnerable, I think.
Yeah. And Steve, we had a guest on just prior to you for another cybersecurity panel. And they brought up the point that cybersecurity really is asymmetric when you think about it in terms of risk. You could mitigate, let's call it 99% of incidents, right? It's that one, right? That 1% that's going to make the headlines, have the most impact to the bottom line. And for a public company, what you have to report on. So it really is asymmetric in a way you don't really want to hear from the cyber side of the enterprise for the most part.
Right. So I think, again, if you have a good incident response plan that's got 99% of the cases covered, and you exercise that and practice that, and you do your backups and you do all the other preparations, I think whatever happens, you might have some impact, but the impact will be minimized. And that's really the best you can hope for.
Jill,
Yeah.
can I jump in? And yeah, so on top of what Steve just said, part of the incident response plan should include your insurance policy, because there are a lot of provisions in there that dictate the insured's responsibility following a loss. And some examples are the use of panel firms, panel breach response counsel, IT forensics, IT restoration, et cetera. So that should be part of the plan.
Which is interesting, Jennifer, because in terms of the legislative framework, it is in the process of being developed. This is, if I'm correct, a newer area in terms of litigation and liability. So it's evolving, as the industry itself is, as technology itself is evolving, because as you know, emerging technology begets more technology. The more data you collect, the more data, it just begets more data. And, that's the whole point of these emerging technologies, and the exercise around it is to develop products and processes and efficiencies. But again, that also it also lends to some challenges and risks as well, and understanding what that framework looks like.
Yeah, absolutely. I always tell everybody that, yes, I'm a cyber insurance broker, but I also have to understand the law, and because there's a lot of impact that our clients face with respect to the regulatory environment and requirements. And then I also have to have some sort of well-versed knowledge of the cybersecurity area as well. So it's very broad range of expertise that goes into it.
Yeah, which is interesting, because you don't necessarily have to be, a comp sci or engineering expert. I mean, cybersecurity transcends into every space, right? And that's data as well, right? So, I mean, our roles have just changed substantially. And Ayal, if you think about it, even in the past 5 years with the cloud migration, and then we saw hybrid environments, we became more familiar with it as a result of COVID and how the pandemic changed work. And then throw into that, deploying and innovating on these emerging technologies like Gen AI. A lot has happened in the past 5 years for the risk part of the organization, that the cyber security part of it, to evolve and adapt to in relatively a short time.
Yeah. Look, I think as technologies go ahead, and we're in the age that we need to deploy new technologies, those create efficiencies and they'll just add to humankind. I think that if you take, for example, AI, we all very much enjoy to just throw data into ChatGPT, and what kind of proprietary data are our employees setting, just putting up there? How many times have any of us through an Excel sheet, they might have a P&L of a company, or threw up some ideas, and now there's companies, actually, that's what they do. They mitigate those type of risks. Cyber is about risk, and how do you mitigate risk, and how do you bring in new technologies that can also build an amazing experience for all of us, but also mitigate the risk and make sure that we're not exposed. And I'm happy to see that we're part of this phase 2 or even phase 3 of AI, with being able to actually protect ourselves from a lot of vulnerabilities that are created just through AI.
Yeah, and Steve, that's a great point that Ayal brings up, because Gen AI might be newer to the consumer in different parts of the enterprise, but AI in itself and machine learning, these aren't necessarily new tools. I mean, they have been around, and cybersecurity teams have been working with them. Do you think it's just this explosion of data, and the fact that it's it's almost ubiquitous at this point? It is the commodity in 2024 and beyond.
Right. I think two things. I think the fact you made about the explosion of data and the amount of data that's out there, and then secondly, the number of people who have their hands on that data and they're using it in those tools. So all of those examples you gave before, they might have limited access to those tools and limited access to the data. Now we're enabling everybody in an organization to do their own analysis using tools, and so it's much harder to control, as Ayal said. So I think that's the challenge we've got going forward.
Yeah. And Jennifer, if you think about this conversation even 6 months from now, but if we look even further out, 1, 3, 5 years, it could look very different in terms of the types of topics that we're talking about, the capabilities and efficiencies that these emerging technologies are allowing for companies. So by the time some of these frameworks get in place, guess what? We're kind of on to the next thing. And I think that's what makes it challenging, right? But it's also exciting at the same time of what the possibilities are. So you don't want to necessarily scare away innovation or over regulate to the point where people are afraid to innovate, right? And that sometimes comes up when you think about liability, but the possibilities are also something we need to recognize.
Absolutely. I try to tell my clients when we talk about investment in cybersecurity, cybersecurity is not one and done. It's something that it's a continuum of evolution. As the claims, means, and methods change and evolve, so too will security. And that goes toward the loss analysis. And we talked earlier about limit adequacy. When I talk with our clients about their loss analysis and their exposure, I let them know that this analysis is backward looking. It's not forward looking. So it's telling you what your exposure is right now. However, in 3 months, 6 months, 12 months from now, the cyber landscape is going to be completely different, and we'll be looking and talking about very different types of cyber attacks.
All right. Appreciate everyone's insight. Thanks for joining us on Trade Talks. I'm Jill Malandrino, Global Markets Reporter at Nasdaq.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.